You can take your nursing bag and your Bible and get off Tarver land. Calvin married a black girl, but that never made you a Tarver, and this house knows it. Pruett Tarver said it in the front parlor of the house on Northwood Avenue, with his dead mother not yet a week in the ground and a plate of his own sister-in-law's ham still warm on the sideboard. He said it loud, on purpose, so the cousins in the hall would hear. He smiled when he said it. A man smiles like that when he thinks the whole room is already on his side. He set a cardboard box down at Delia's feet. Inside it were her reading glasses, a framed photo of Calvin in his church suit, and the little ceramic cardinal she kept on the kitchen windowsill. He'd packed it himself that morning while the casseroles were still arriving. "You've got till the end of the month," he said. "I'll be kind about the dates." Mother would have wanted me to be kind. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 16 Tarvers stood in that parlor with sweet tea sweating in their hands, and not one of them said her name. Delia Tarver was 54 years old. She had washed Eleanor Tarver's body, fed her, turned her every 2 hours for 4 years, and held her hand at the last breath. She did not raise her voice now. She looked at the box at her feet, then at the man who packed it, and she folded her hands the way she folded them at every bedside she had ever sat beside. What Pruett did not know, standing there in his good gray suit, was that he had just handed away his own house. Not Delia's, his. The dead woman he was so sure had left him, everything had left him a witness instead, and a tin soldered shut, and a name he'd spent a whole year trying to bury. By the end of the summer, the man holding the keys to Tarver land would be the one with nowhere to sleep, and Delia would not raise her voice once to make it happen. Let me take you back. Florence, Alabama, sits up in the green northwest corner of the state, where the Tennessee River runs wide and the old mill money built streets of deep porches and tall white columns. The Wood Avenue Historic District is the heart of that old money. People drive through it slow on Sunday evenings to look at the houses, the way you'd look at something in a museum. The Tarver house was the grandest of them. 3 stories of white clapboard under pecan trees so old their roots had cracked the sidewalk into a slow gray wave. Delia had lived in that house for 31 years. She had married into it at 23, when Calvin Tarver, the older of Eleanor's 2 boys, took her hand on the courthouse steps over in town and told her the columns out front had been holding up that porch since before the Civil War, and they would hold up the 2 of them too. They did. For 31 years, they did. She was a hospice nurse. That is its own kind of calling, and not everyone has the stomach for it. Delia did. She sat with the dying the way some people sit with the newborn, with a patience that did not flinch. She knew the smell of a room 3 days out. She knew how to make a frightened man laugh at 4 in the morning. And she wrote everything down, every chart, every dose, every change in a breath, every word a patient said when the family stepped out. She kept a spiral notebook in her bag and a steel filing box at home, and she dated every page in her small, even hand. "You write it all down like it matters," Pruett told her once, years back at a Thanksgiving table, and he'd laughed when he said it. It mattered. He would learn how much. When Eleanor Tarver got sick 4 years before that day in the parlor, it was Delia who moved into the back bedroom and never moved out again. Calvin had passed 2 winters earlier, his heart quiet in his sleep. So it was just the 2 women in that big house, the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law, and a sickness that took its time. Eleanor was 88. She was sharp as a tack right to the end, sharper than her son Pruett ever was, and she and Delia had grown into something the rest of the family never quite saw. In the long afternoons, Eleanor would have Delia pull a shoebox of old photographs onto the quilt and tell the stories behind them. Who built the smokehouse? Which pecan tree Calvin fell out of? Which Tarver had been a scoundrel? And there were several. "They never did make room for you, did they?" Eleanor said one of those afternoons, plain as weather. "My family treated you like the help who married up." Delia didn't answer that. She just smoothed the quilt. "You're more Tarver than the lot of them," the old woman said. You're the only one who ever showed up." It was Eleanor who started saying the strange things near the end. The morphine, the cousins said later when it came up, the confusion. One evening, with the light going gold through the pecan trees, Eleanor gripped Delia's wrist with a strength that didn't belong to a dying body and said a name. "Spiegel," she said. "You remember it." "Spiegel." "All right," Delia said gently. "I'll remember. Don't let them tell you it isn't done. It's done. I had it done." Her eyes were fierce and far away at the same time. Spiegel's got it. Delia wrote the name in her notebook that night, under the date, because that was what she did. Spiegel. She had no idea what it meant. She thought it was a person from the old days, somebody from Eleanor's girlhood. She let it be. 2 weeks before the end, Eleanor sent her down to the cedar chest in the hall for a small tin. It was a sewing tin, the kind that once held buttons, with a faded picture of pearl buttons on the pink lid. But this one was heavier than buttons, and someone had run a bead of solder all the way around the seam, sealing the lid to the body, so the thing would not open at all. "That's for you," Eleanor said. "Put it somewhere safe and don't you open it." "Not yet." "When then?" The old woman looked at her a long moment. "Don't open it till the house tries to leave you," she said. "You'll know the day." Delia thought it was the medicine talking. She put the soldered tin in the back of her own closet behind the winter quilts, and she half forgot about it. There was too much to do. There was a woman to keep comfortable, and then there was a woman to bury. Eleanor Tarver died on a Tuesday morning in May in her own bed, with Delia's hand in hers and the window open to the birds. She was 88 years old. Delia closed her eyes for her and sat a while in the quiet, and then she did the things a nurse knows how to do, and then she called the family. The family came fast, faster than they'd come in 4 years of sickness. Pruett Tarver came fastest of all. He was Calvin's younger brother, 59 now, soft in the middle, with the kind of handshake that squeezed too hard. He had not visited his mother more than 4 times in her last 2 years, and Delia had the dates for every visit, because she wrote those down too. But he came the day she died with a leather folder under his arm and a way of walking through the house, like he was already measuring the rooms. What Delia didn't know, what almost nobody knew, was how close to the bottom Pruett Tarver had sunk. He'd put money he didn't have into a land deal out at Cypress Mill. 60 acres he was sure would go to a subdivision, and the deal had collapsed and taken his savings with it. He'd put a second mortgage on his own house off Cox Creek to cover the hole. The bank was sending letters now with hard words in them. He was a matter of weeks from losing the roof over his head, and only one thing in this world could save him: the house on Northwood Avenue, the grand white one under the pecans. A developer up from Birmingham had already whispered a number for that lot. Cash, fast, the kind of number that makes a drowning man's ears ring. All Pruett had to do was own it. All he had to do was make sure the daughter-in-law, the nurse, the outsider, didn't. So he was kind at first, in his way. At the wake, he stood close to Delia and told the cousins what a comfort she'd been to Mother. He let 4 days go by. He let the flowers wilt and the dishes get returned to their owners. He let Delia start to breathe again. And then he held the repast. In the old families down there, the repast is the gathering after the burial, the meal where everybody comes back to the house and eats and tells stories, and the grieving get carried for an afternoon. Delia cooked for it. Of course she did. She was up at 5, the way she'd been up at 5 her whole life, and she made the ham and the greens and the peach cobbler in Eleanor's own dishes, and she set the long table with the good cloth, the one with Eleanor's mother's initials stitched in the corner. She filled that house with the smell of a real Southern table, because that was how she knew to honor the dead. With work, with her own 2 hands. The cousins came at 2. By 1:30, the parlor was full, and that was when Pruett Tarver set down his sweet tea, took the leather folder out from under his arm, and pulled out a will. He read it standing up, in the center of the room, in a voice pitched for the back row. The house and the land and all that was in it, to him. Pruett Lee Tarver. The last real Tarver, he said, looking around at the cousins, and they looked at the floor. Mother's final wishes, signed and dated. He let the cousins see the page, the signature at the bottom, Eleanor's looping hand. There was a lawyer's stamp on it. Crittenden, the name said, small, in the corner. Boyd Crittenden, attorney. And then he reached behind the sofa and brought out the cardboard box he'd packed that morning, and he carried it across the room and set it down at Delia's feet, on the good cloth's own floor. And he said the thing about the nursing bag and the Bible and Tarver land, and the room went so quiet you could hear the ice settle in 16 glasses. Delia looked down at the box, her reading glasses, Calvin in his church suit, the little ceramic cardinal off the windowsill. She did not cry. She had not cried at her own husband's grave where anyone could see, and she would not cry now. She bent, slow and steady, and she picked up the framed photo of Calvin and held it against her chest with both hands, the way you'd hold something living. "All right, Pruett," she said. Low, even. All right. That was all. 2 words and a man's name. And something about the calm of it made 1 or 2 of the cousins shift on their feet, because it was not the sound of a woman who had lost. It was the sound of a woman doing arithmetic. She gathered the box. She walked out through her own kitchen, past the cobbler cooling on the counter, out the back door under the pecan trees, and she set the box on the seat of her old Buick and drove the few minutes home to the small house on the east side that she and Calvin had kept all those years and rented out and finally moved back into when the renters left. Her name was on that one, just hers. She put Calvin's photo on the table. She sat down in the quiet, and she did not think about crying, and she did not think about Pruett's smile. She thought about a thing an old woman had said to her with fierce, far-off eyes 2 weeks before she died. Don't open it till the house tries to leave you. The house had just tried to leave her. Delia got up, went to the back of her closet, and moved the winter quilts aside. The winter quilts smelled of cedar and old summers. Delia moved them aside one at a time, careful, the way she did everything. And there at the back of the shelf was the pearl button tin where she'd left it. The pink lid faded, the little painted buttons looking up at her like they had something to say. She carried it to the kitchen table and set it down under the light, next to Calvin's photo. The solder was still there, that ugly gray bead running all the way around the seam where someone had sealed the lid to the body. Eleanor had been firm about it. Don't you open it. Not yet. Don't open it till the house tries to leave you. Delia ran her thumb around the cold metal of it and thought about an old woman's fierce, far-off eyes, and she understood now that those eyes had not been far away at all. They had been looking straight down the road at this exact night. She got a butter knife and a pair of kitchen pliers, and she worked at the seam. Slow, patient. The same hands that had eased 1,000 small sufferings. The solder gave a little. She worked it. The lid groaned and then it lifted, and the smell that came up was not buttons. It was machine oil and old felt and something plastic. Inside, wrapped in a square of flannel cut from a man's old shirt, was a small black recorder. A micro-cassette machine, the kind people once used to dictate letters, the kind a doctor might carry. There was a tape already loaded in it, and taped to the back, on a strip of masking paper in Eleanor's looping hand, 3 words. Play me first. Delia sat down. Her heart was going now, the way it did not go even in the parlor with the box at her feet. She pressed the button. There was a hiss, a breath, and then a voice came out of that little speaker that she had not heard in over a year, thin and worn but unmistakable. Eleanor Tarver, talking from inside a sealed tin. Delia, if you're hearing this, then it's happened, hasn't it? The house has tried to leave you, and that means my son has done the thing I prayed he wouldn't do. I'm sorry, child. I knew him better than I let on. I just kept hoping. Delia put her hand flat on the table. Now you listen to me, and you listen close because I haven't got the wind to say it twice. The old voice gathered itself. That house is not Pruett's. I changed it. 2 years back, When I could still get up the courthouse steps on my own, I had a new deed drawn. The house on Northwood Avenue, the land, all of it goes to you, to Delia Tarver, not to him, to you who showed up. I had it done proper, signed and witnessed and filed at the Lauderdale County Courthouse with my own hand. It is on the record. You go and you pull it. A pause. A breath that rattled. The lawyer I used, you stay away from, Boyd Crittenden. He drew Pruett's papers too, and a man who serves two masters serves the one who pays loudest. I didn't trust him at the end, so I took the original, the signed original, and I put it somewhere safe, and I gave it to a man who keeps his word. You remember the name, Spiegel. Hollis Spiegel. He's a notary child, not a ghost. He's got it. He knows what day it was. You find Spiegel. Delia's eyes closed. Spiegel. The name from the deathbed, the one the cousins had waved away as the morphine talking. It had never been confusion. It had been an old woman trying, with the last clear corner of her mind, to hand her daughter-in-law a key. There's one more thing. The voice softened, and Delia heard the smile come into it, the way you can hear a smile even on a worn-out tape. You've been carrying it on your own keyring for 2 years, and you never knew. That little brass key I slipped on there, the worn one, the one you thought went to some old lock of mine. It's a safe deposit box, First Metro on Court Street. For when you need it, I told you. Well, you need it. Everything's in that box, Delia. Everything they'll try to say doesn't exist. A long breath, the last of it. They never made you a Tarver, Eleanor said. So I did. On paper, where it counts, where they can't sneer it away. You were the only one who ever showed up, and a family is just the people who show up. Now go on, go get your porch back, and don't you raise your voice. You never needed to. The tape hissed and ran out. Delia sat in the small kitchen for a long while, her hand on the recorder, the cardinal off the windowsill, back home now in a cardboard box on the floor. She did not cry, but she reached up, slow, and she took her key ring out of her purse, and she turned it over in the light until she found it. A small brass key, worn smooth, dull with age. She had carried it for 2 years. She had thought it was nothing. She had nearly thrown it away twice. For when you need it. In the morning, Delia did what she always did when the world tilted. She got out a fresh spiral notebook, and she dated the top of the page in her small, even hand, and she made a list. She wrote the names down. Boyd Crittenden, Hollis Spiegel, First Metro, Court Street. She wrote the date Eleanor said on the tape, the day the deed was signed, and she underlined it twice. Pruett had stood in that parlor and read a will dated the winter after. If Eleanor had deeded the house away 2 years before she died, then the house had never been Eleanor's to leave in any will at all. You cannot give away what you no longer own. Pruett had built his whole performance on a foundation that, if the record held, was already gone out from under him. If the record held... She drove downtown that same morning to the Lauderdale County Courthouse, the tall brick building where the marble steps are worn into soft dips by 150 years of feet. She stood at the records counter and she asked, polite, hands folded, for the deed history on the property on Northwood Avenue. The clerk was kind. She pulled it up. She printed the chain of title and slid it across the counter, and Delia read it twice, slow, and the floor seemed to go quiet under her. The record showed the house passing from Eleanor Tarver to Pruett Lee Tarver. That was all. There was no deed to Delia. There was no transfer 2 years back. According to the official record of Lauderdale County, the thing Eleanor swore on tape she had done with her own hand had simply never happened. Is this the whole history? Delia asked. Even. Quiet. That's everything we've got on file, ma'am. Delia thanked her and folded the paper and walked back out into the heat, with her mind working like a chart at a bedside, fast and cold and clear. Eleanor had been certain. Eleanor had named the day. Eleanor was not a woman who imagined filing a deed, and yet the record was clean as a wiped counter. which meant the deed had been there and then it had not been there, which meant somebody had reached into the file and lifted it out. A document does not walk out of a courthouse on its own. Someone with access had pulled it, and someone with a reason. And the only man Eleanor had named with both was the lawyer who'd served 2 masters and drawn both sets of papers, Boyd Crittenden. Delia stood on the worn marble steps, and she did not feel afraid. She felt the things settle over her that settled over her in a dying room when the family was falling apart and somebody had to be steady. She had the tape. She had the brass key. She had a name, Spiegel, that the record couldn't erase because it lived in a man, not a file. And she had 30 years of knowing how to follow a paper trail to its end. She had till the end of the month, Pruett had said. She intended to use it. That evening, she had a hospice patient's family to see, paperwork to drop at the county building downtown, the long, sad business of a life winding down that did not stop just because her own had been upended. It was past 9 when she finished, the halls of the county building gone dim and echoing, most everyone home. She was walking out through the side corridor when she heard the slow drag of a mop bucket on its wheels, and a woman's voice, low and warm, said her name, Delia Tarver. Delia turned. A woman stood by the janitor's cart, maybe 60, in a gray work shirt with a name patch on it, her hair under a kerchief, a kind, tired face. The patch said, Verleen. You don't know me, the woman said. Verleen Pickett. I do the nights here. But I knew Miss Eleanor. Lord, did I know her. She set the mop down. Couple years back, my husband took sick, and the hospital liked to ruin us. Bills past what we could ever pay. And one day, they were gone. Marked settled. Somebody had paid them off and asked the hospital not to say who. Took me a year to find out it was Eleanor Tarver. She never said a word about it. Not to me, not to anybody. That was her way. Delia's throat tightened. That was her way. I heard what they did to you, Verleen said. Word gets around a building like this. The lawyers and the clerks talk in the daytime, and at night I'm the one emptying their cans, so I hear it after. She looked down the dim hall, then back, and her voice dropped lower. Eleanor wrote things down too, same as you. She was always carrying that little machine around, talking into it, keeping her own books. You go find what she left, Delia. Don't let them tell you it isn't there. It's there. I'm trying to find it, Delia said. Verleen reached out and put a worn hand on Delia's arm, and then she said a thing that did not make sense yet, a thing Delia would not understand for hours. Said it quiet and urgent, like a woman passing a secret across a fence. Listen to me now. Don't go home tonight. Delia looked at her. What? Don't go to that little house on the east side tonight. You hear? Find somewhere else. A friend, a motel, anywhere. Verleen's eyes were steady. I clean these offices. I hear the phone calls that get made in the daytime, and I empty the cans that have the notes nobody thinks twice about throwing away. There's something fixed to happen at your place tonight. I don't know all of it, but I know the word abandoned got used, and I know there's a man coming with a truck, and I know they want it to look a certain way by morning. She squeezed Delia's arm. A house that looks left behind is a house easier to take. You stay away tonight and you let it stay full and lived in. You understand me? Delia did not fully understand. Not yet. But she had spent her whole life trusting the quiet word of a tired woman over the loud word of a confident man, and she was not about to stop now. I understand, she said. Thank you, Verleen. Thank Eleanor, Verleen said, and she picked her mop back up. I'm just paying down a debt nobody ever asked me to. Delia drove away from the county building that night, and she did not go home. She drove instead to the east side house only long enough to leave every light burning. The porch lamp, the kitchen, the lamp in the front room by Calvin's photo, the radio playing low through an open window so the place would sound like a woman was in it. Then she drove to a friend's house across town, a fellow nurse named Rosetta, and she slept in a spare bed and stared at the ceiling and turned the brass key over and over in her fingers in the dark. In the morning, she would learn what Verlene had spared her. In the morning, a neighbor would tell her about the truck that idled out front past midnight, and the two men who got out and walked the property and stood on her dark porch, trying the door, and how they'd looked up at all those burning lights and the radio playing and gotten back in the truck and driven off. A house full of light is not an abandoned house. There was no story to tell about a woman who'd already gone, but that was morning. First there was the brass key and the box on Court Street, and a notary named Hollis Spiegel who knew exactly what day it was. Morning came soft and gray over Florence, the kind of June morning that promises heat by noon, and Delia Tarver woke in Rosetta's spare bed, already dressed in her mind. She thanked Rosetta with a squeeze of the hand and a plate of eggs she barely touched, and she drove back across town toward the small house on the east side with the brass key warm in her fist where she'd held it half the night. She did not go inside right away. She sat at the curb and looked at her own front porch, the lights still burning yellow against the daylight, the radio she'd left on murmuring some gospel station through the open window, and she understood without anyone having to tell her that the house had been watched. A neighbor came out onto her steps in a housecoat, an older woman named Miss Purleen, who'd lived 3 doors down for 30 years, and she crossed the dewy grass with her arms folded and her mouth set. "Delia," she said, "there was a truck out front past midnight. Big one. I couldn't sleep with my hip, so I was up, and I saw it idling there with its lights off, which is a thing that'll wake a body right up. 2 men got out. They walked all around your place, slow, like they were measuring it. One of them went up on your porch and tried your door." Miss Purleen pressed her lips together. "And then they stood there looking up at all your lights burning and your radio going, and they talked to each other, and they got back in that truck and they left. I almost called the police. I wish I had." "You did right just watching," Delia said, gentle. "You watching is what mattered." She did not say the rest of it out loud, but it laid itself out in her mind clean as a chart. A house that looks left behind is a house easier to take. Verlene had set it in the dim hall with a mop in her hand, and now here was the proof of it standing in the dew. Somebody had wanted to come in the night and put her things on the lawn and change the locks and have it look, by morning, like a woman who'd already given up and gone, abandoned. The word Verlene had pulled out of a wastebasket. You couldn't tell a story about a woman fighting to keep her porch if the porch was already empty and dark when the cameras came. They had needed her gone first. And a tired woman with a mop, paying down a debt nobody asked her to pay, had stood in a corridor and spent that whole plan with 3 quiet words. Delia went inside, turned off her lights one by one, turned off the radio, and stood a moment in the front room with her hand on Calvin's photo. Then she got back in the Buick and she drove downtown to Court Street, to the First Metro Bank with its heavy glass doors, and she went to the counter and she set the worn brass key on the marble. The young man at the desk looked it up and his eyebrows went up a little. "This box has been on prepaid rental a long time, ma'am. Paid through, for years yet, under the name Tarver." He took her identification and he checked it twice, and then he led her back through a door into the cool quiet of the vault, all those little brass doors in their rows, and he fit the bank's key and waited while Delia fit hers, and the 2 keys turned together the way 2 keys must, and the long box slid out into her hands, heavier than she expected. He left her alone in a small room with a table. Delia sat. She lifted the lid. On top was an envelope in Eleanor's looping hand, her name on it. Delia, just Delia, and underneath it a thick folded document with a blue paper backing and a notary's embossed seal pressed into the corner, so the paper rose up in a little blind circle you could read with your fingers in the dark. A deed. The deed. The house on Northwood Avenue, the land under the pecan trees, granted and conveyed to Delia Tarver, signed in Eleanor's shaking but certain hand, dated, witnessed, and stamped by a notary public of the state of Alabama, Lauderdale County. And there in the corner, in fountain ink gone a little brown with 2 years, the notary's signature, Hollis Spiegel. Delia sat very still. The cool of the vault, the hum of the lights, the heaviness of the paper. She opened the envelope. The letter was short. If you found the tin and you found this, then you've done the part I couldn't do for you, which is keep going when they tell you to stop. This is the original, child. The one filed at the courthouse is the copy of record, and copies can be lost. But mister, Spiegel keeps the original and he keeps his book, and a man's book is a hard thing to argue with. Don't wave this around. Take it to people who matter and let it speak in its own quiet voice. Same as you. I always did love how you never had to be loud. Eleanor. Delia folded the letter back along its creases. She did not cry, but she sat with her hand flat on the deed for a long moment. The way she'd sat with her hand on the recorder, the way she'd sat at 100 bedsides at the moment when the room goes quiet and the work is done. Then she put the deed and the letter in her bag, locked the empty box back into the wall, and walked out into the heat of Court Street, with the proof Pruett had sworn did not exist riding against her hip. She found Hollis Spiegel that same afternoon. He was not a ghost, and he was not confusion. He was a stooped man of 80-some in a tidy office above a hardware store off Tennessee Street, with a brass nameplate gone dull and a wall of small black ledger books lined up by year, like a row of hymnals. He looked at Delia over his glasses when she said her name, and something in his old face eased. "Eleanor Tarver," he said, before she'd asked a thing. "I wondered if you'd come. She told me you might. She said, 'Hollis, if a tall, quiet woman named Delia comes asking, you pull the book and you read her the truth.'" He got up slow and ran a finger along the spines and pulled one down, and he opened it on the desk and turned it to face her. And there it was, in his own neat hand, the date, the names, the act. "I notarize a thing. I write it in my book the same hour. Date, parties, what was signed, who stood witness. 41 years I've kept these. The state could take my seal, but it can't take my book." He tapped the page. Eleanor came up those stairs on her own 2 feet that day, which I remember because it cost her something to do it, and she wouldn't take my arm. She knew exactly what she wanted done and to whom. There wasn't a foggy minute in her. And there was a young fellow with her stood witness, worked with his hands. Mabry, I want to say. Odell Mabry, Delia said, and the name surfaced out of 4 years of Sunday afternoons. The handyman Eleanor had quietly put through trade school down at the community college, who'd fixed the matriarch's gutters and her old radiators and never once let her pay full price. That's the one. Spiegel closed the book gentle, like a man closing a Bible. "You tell me when and where, Mrs. Tarver, and I'll bring this book and these old bones and I'll read it out to whoever needs to hear it. I owe that woman more than a morning of my time." Delia drove out to find Odell Mabry the next day, to a small, neat house out past the edge of town with a truck in the yard and a dog that didn't bother to get up. He was younger than she'd remembered, maybe 40, with careful eyes, and when she said Eleanor's name, he set down the carburetor he'd been wiping and stood there a second, wiping his hands on a rag long after they were clean. "I signed something for her," he said, "up at a notary's, downtown. She asked me to come, and I came, because that woman, when my mama was dying, she sent over food every single day and never put her name to any of it. So when she asked me to drive her downtown and put my name on a paper, I didn't ask what the paper was. I just signed where she pointed." He looked at Delia. "It was the spring. I know it was the spring because the dogwoods were out on Court Street, and she said something about them. 2 springs back, not the last one. The one before." He frowned. "Why? Somebody's saying it didn't happen?" "Somebody's saying a lot of things didn't happen," Delia said. "Would you say what you just told me, if it came to it? In front of people?" "I'll say it anywhere," Odell said. "I'll say it on the courthouse steps. That woman doesn't get called a liar in her grave. Not while I'm standing up." So now Delia had it in 3 places that no greedy hand could reach all at once. The original deed in her bag with its blind stamped seal, an old notary with a 41-year book and a debt of the heart, a handyman who remembered the dogwoods and would say so out loud, and running under all of it, the things she could not yet prove but could see plain as a chart at the foot of a bed, was the empty place in the county record where the deed should have been and was not. Eleanor had filed it. Spiegel's book said so. Odell said so. The matriarch herself said so, from inside a sealed tin. And yet the courthouse file held only Pruett's name. Documents do not lift themselves out of a county file and walk away. Somebody with a hand inside that building had reached in and made the record lie. And the only man Eleanor had named with both the access and the appetite was the lawyer who drew both sets of papers and served whichever master paid loudest, Boyd Crittenden. Delia was thinking exactly that, sitting in the Buick outside Odell's place with the engine ticking, when her phone buzzed against the seat. A number she didn't know. She answered it the way she answered everything, low and even. Mrs. Tarver. A man's voice, smooth, lawyerly, with a little smile sanded into it. Boyd Crittenden. I handled some affairs for the late Mrs. Eleanor Tarver, and I represent her estate, which is to say I represent Mr. Pruett Tarver in the matter of the Northwood Avenue property. A pause for effect. It's come to my attention you've been downtown asking questions, pulling records, visiting people. I want to save you some heartache, ma'am, because I can hear you're a sensible woman. There is no other deed. There is no other will. Whatever an old lady might have told you in her last months, you understand the mind gets cloudy at the end. You of all people would know that, being a nurse. The property is closing soon. Mr. Tarver has a buyer, a fine developer who'll do right by that old block. It would be a kindness to yourself to stop digging up things that'll only hurt when they don't pan out. Delia let the quiet sit a moment, the way she did. Outside the windshield, the dog had finally gotten up and was nosing at the truck tire in the heat. "Mr. Crittenden," she said, "can I ask you something? When did you last look in that county file your own self?" The smile went out of his voice. "I beg your pardon." "I just wonder," Delia said, gentle as anything, "how a man knows for certain a thing isn't in a file. You'd have to have looked. You'd have to have looked real close." She let that breathe. "You have a good day now." She hung up before he could answer, and she sat there with both hands on the wheel, not shaking, not afraid, her mind already turning to the one thing she had not yet pinned down. She had the deed, and the seal, and the book, and the witness. What she did not have, not yet, was the hand. Somebody had seen that hand reach into the file. Somebody emptied the cans at night and heard the daytime talk and watched the lawyers come and go. And that somebody had already crossed a dim corridor once to tell her not to go home. It was time to go back and ask Verlene Pickett the one question she hadn't thought to ask. The night janitor's cart was parked outside the records room when Delia found her, and Verlene Pickett was on her knees with a rag, wiping the baseboard where the floor wax had yellowed, and she did not look surprised to see Delia standing in the doorway with her bag on her shoulder and a question already in her face. "You came back," Verlene said. She sat up on her heels and pressed a fist into the small of her back. "I figured you might. You got that look my own mama used to get, the one that means a body's gone all the way to the end of a thing and found the door locked from the inside." "I found the deed," Delia said. "I found Mr. Spiegel, and his book, and the man who stood witness. I have all of it, Verlene. The paper says the house is mine, signed and sealed and dated 2 springs back." She set her bag down by the door, slow, the way she set things down at a bedside so as not to startle the dying. And every bit of it says the same thing. Eleanor filed that deed at the courthouse, her own self, but the county file doesn't have it. The county file has Pruett's name and a will I never saw her write. She looked at the older woman a long moment. A paper doesn't climb out of a drawer and walk off on its own. Somebody took it out, and you've been emptying these cans and mopping these floors after dark for a long time. And you hear the daytime talk in an empty building the way I hear a chest rattle. So I came to ask you the one thing I should have asked the first night." She kept her voice even. Did you see who did it? Verlene Pickett got up off the floor in stages, the way a woman does when her knees have given the better part of 40 years to other people's buildings. And she went to her cart and folded the rag and laid it down like she needed her hands busy to say it. There's a lawyer comes around, she said. Slick fellow, gray at the sides, drives a car that costs more than this building pays me in 3 years. Crittenden. He's got a way of coming in late, after the clerks go home, when it's just me and the wax machine. He has a key he shouldn't have, or somebody loaned him one, I don't know which. And one evening, this past winter, January, the snow that didn't stick, I was running the buffer down this very hall, and I saw him in the records room with the long file drawers open and his coat still on. She pressed her lips. He had a folder. Pulled a paper out of it. The blue-backed kind. You know the kind. The heavy kind with the seal that puffs the paper up. Folded it into his coat. Then he took something else out of his own pocket and put it in the drawer in its place and closed it up neat. I thought, that's a man doing a thing he'd rather nobody saw, but I'm the one nobody sees. She looked at Delia. I didn't know whose paper it was. I surely didn't know it was hers. If I'd known, I'd have laid down in that doorway before I let him walk out with it. You're telling me now, Delia said. That's what matters. Would you say it where it counts? In the daylight? In front of the people who run this county? Verlene Pickett was quiet a moment. Then she untied her apron and folded it over the cart handle, as if the question itself had ended her shift. Eleanor Tarver paid a bill for me one time that would have taken my house, she said. Never signed her name to it. I only found out it was her because the billing girl let it slip. So yes, Delia, I'll stand in the daylight and I'll point at that man with this old crooked finger, and I'll tell them what I saw. It's the least a person can do, to be a witness for somebody who was a witness for you. The closing was set for that Friday in a conference room on the second floor of the Lauderdale County Courthouse, the kind of room with a long table and a pitcher of water sweating in the heat and a flag drooping in the corner. Delia knew the date because Boyd Crittenden, in his smoothness, had let it slip on the phone, and a clerk Delia had nursed's mother had confirmed it. The developer's people were there in good suits with a leather folder of checks. Pruett Tarver was there in a sport coat that didn't quite close at the front anymore, and there was something in his face that Delia had seen in 100 rooms, over 100 beds, the particular gray look of a man who has bills he cannot pay and is reaching for the one thing that might still save him. Boyd Crittenden sat at his elbow with his pen. Delia Tarver walked in unhurried, in her good navy dress, with her bag on her shoulder, and she set the bag on the table and she did not sit down. Mrs. Tarver. Crittenden's smile was bright and brief. This is a private closing. You weren't invited, and you have no standing here. I'll have to ask you to step out. I'll be brief, Delia said. Then I'll go, and you all can decide what kind of room you want to be. She opened the bag. She took out a small soldered tin with pearl buttons sewn to the lid. The one Eleanor had pressed into her hands a year before, with the strange instruction not to open it until the house tried to leave her. The one Delia had finally pried open with a kitchen knife at Rosetta's table, while the radio played low. She set the tin on the table. She took out a little recorder, and she set that beside it. She took out the deed, the original, the blue-backed page with the notary's seal, blind stamped into the corner, so it cast a small shadow under the overhead light. She laid that down too, and then she pressed the button on the recorder, and into that overheated room came the voice of a woman a year in her grave. My name is Eleanor Tarver, and I am in my right mind, whatever anybody says after I'm gone. The voice was thin and certain, and Pruett Tarver went very still. I have deeded the house on Northwood Avenue to Delia, who nursed me and loved me when my own blood was counting my breaths against the clock. I have filed the deed at the courthouse this very week. I have left the original with Hollis Spiegel, who notarized it, because I know my younger boy, and I know what he'll reach for when he's frightened, and I know there are men who'll help him reach for it for a fee. A pause, a breath. the rasp of an old woman gathering herself. Pruett, if you're hearing this, it's because you tried. Put it down, son. The house was never the legacy. You were. The recorder clicked off. The room held its breath. That could be anyone, Crittenden said, but the smile was gone and the bright was gone with it. The door opened. Hollis Spiegel came in first, stooped over his cane with a small black ledger book under his arm, and behind him came Odell Mabry in a clean pressed shirt with his hat in his hands, and behind Odell came Verlene Pickett in her church clothes, her chin up. Spiegel made his slow way to the head of the table and set his book down and opened it without being asked. And he put his finger on a line, and he read it out in a voice that filled the room, the date, the names, the act, the witness, all of it in his own neat ink from 2 springs back, and then he looked up over his glasses at Boyd Crittenden. "I've kept this book 41 years, Hollis Spiegel said. I notarized this deed the morning the Dogwoods were out on Court Street. Mrs. Eleanor Tarver climbed my stairs on her own 2 feet and would not take my arm. This young man stood witness." He nodded at Odell. "I signed where she pointed," Odell Mabry said. "She was sharp as a tack. I'll say it under oath, on the steps, anywhere a person needs me to say it." And then Verlene Pickett took 1 step forward, and she lifted her crooked finger, and she pointed it down the length of that long table, straight at Boyd Crittenden. "I saw you," she said, "in the records room in January after the clerks went home, with the drawers open and your coat still on. I saw you fold that blue paper into your coat and put another one down in its place. I empty the cans in this building. I'm the one nobody sees. But I saw you." Boyd Crittenden's pen stopped moving. The developer's man quietly closed his leather folder of checks and slid it off the table into his lap. And that small sound, that little zip of leather, was the sound of the whole thing ending. It came apart fast after that, the way a thing comes apart when the one beam holding it is pulled. The county opened a probate fraud inquiry within the week, and the deed Eleanor had filed and Crittenden had lifted was matched against Spiegel's book and the recorded original and put back where it belonged, with Delia Tarver's name on the land under the pecan trees. The forged will dissolved into what it had always been, a paper with no breath behind it. The state bar took up a complaint against Boyd Crittenden, and once they started turning over his files, they found he had done it before, found a deed he'd once lost for another family across town, an old man's house gone to a cousin who'd hired Crittenden to make a record lie, and that family who had grieved and packed and gone quiet because they had no notary and no tin and no janitor who saw, got a letter telling them to come back in, and Pruett Tarver, the cash that was meant to land on Wood Avenue and rescue him, never came, because there was nothing left to sell that was his to sell. And the second mortgage he'd hidden and the Cypress Mill deal that had drowned him came due all at once. The foreclosure he'd been running from, the one he had tried to outrun by taking the porch out from under his brother's widow, caught him at his own front door instead. The notice went up on his house, not hers. He stood the last day in his own empty driveway watching a man change his own locks, which was the very thing he'd staged in the dark to do to her, and there was no one whispering for him at all. Delia did not gloat over any of it. She moved her things back into the house on Northwood Avenue, and she put Calvin's photo back on the lamp table, and she sat one evening on the porch she had nearly lost, with the pecan trees going dark and green above her. And she said the only hard thing she would ever say about it, quiet to no one but the dusk. "I had a great aunt who wrote it all down," she said, "and a notary with a book, and a woman with a mop who saw. And what about the ones who don't?" So she set about being the one who writes it down. She opened a small trust in Eleanor's name and a plain steel cabinet of records in the front room, deeds and dates and copies kept in 2 places, for the young niece who had held her hand at the repast, and for anyone on that block who got a knock at the door and a paper they didn't understand. She started keeping a book of her own, A month on, she drove a friend's daughter out to the airport at Muscle Shoals to catch a dawn flight, into the drop-off lane where a year before, a tired stranger had leaned to her window in the gray light and changed the shape of her whole life. A young woman 2 cars up was crying into a phone, a duffel at her feet, the particular shaking of someone who has nowhere safe to sleep tonight. Delia rolled down her window. She leaned out into the cool morning and beckoned the girl over, soft. Now she does the whispering.